All right, folks. Hi, I am back. Starting to record this one a little late. I had a very, very busy day yesterday. Tons of meetings. And this morning, just a headache. Hard to get motivated. Too much on my plate. As you see, I haven't even put my contact lenses in or taken a shower. I feel as the semester progresses, you're going to be seeing a lot more of me wearing a baseball hat because, without the barber, the CPEC hair gets pretty crazy. So I'll try to keep this short. I was super annoyed yesterday because I had switched to using QuickTime from Photo Booth for recording video lectures for class. And of course, it froze up in the middle of my lecture for my Amazonia class. And there were like 8 minutes in which my face didn't move. And after recording a half-hour lecture and expending a lot of energy doing it, the last thing I was going to do was go back and re-record that lecture. Plus, it just feels strangely fake after you've said these things, all these extemporaneous comments, made stupid little jokes, to go back and then do them again. I prep for these, obviously. I read the PowerPoint as I'm doing them. But then things occur, and then you try to remember what you said last time, or you feel stupid saying same thing last time. So I've never gone back and done it a second time. So if this one freezes up, just going to put it up there. The audio will be there. I'll hopefully put some pretty pictures. Great work on the discussion board post this week. One of you actually even sent me a nice email, which made me feel good about how helpful it was to get these prompts and how interesting it is to think about things like working as an anthropologist for somebody like General Honore and helping to formulate like culturally specific slogans to get people to care about environmental conservation. And y'all just did a great job. I was smiling and chuckling the whole time I was reading those. But as I said in the lecture, that is the kind of work anthropologists are expected to do, right? You have a culturally specific group, you're trying to reach them for the purposes of social media, social marketing, even just marketing of economic products, and you've got to craft a specific message. And you know these people, you know their politics, you know their religion, you know all sorts of things about them. So you did a great job really trying to do that. Today, we're going to, of course, keep talking about the main themes. Hochschild's book is very consistent. It never lets us leave that kind of central focus of this book, this great paradox of why people who are suffering from environmental pollution hate the government that could lessen the impact of pollution on their life, at least according to Hochschild's perspective, but we know some of the locals disagree with that. So chapters 6 and 7, and I've entitled this PowerPoint, this lecture, Industry, Disaster, and Government. I'll upload this as soon as I can, by the way, but don't forget, hopefully it'll be up before noon, but at noon we have a live video chat, and I'd love to see some of you on that. Let me just go back and make sure the video is still recording. This is really getting annoying. Okay, looks like it's still recording. We'll see what happens. So discussion board prompt for today. I already put this up. I assume some of you are already working on it. I also put up my PowerPoint. Before I talk about the specific prompt, there's these two YouTube clips that you saw in the PowerPoint that I'd really like you to watch. The first one, the sinkhole that's swallowing Louisiana, is a beautiful little short, not even quite 7-minute film about Bayou Corn. And it has a representative from Texas Brine, the main corporation that's discussed in these chapters, for causing this sinkhole that just destroyed the environment and made this town unlivable for people for many reasons, not only chemical contamination and destroying the landscape, but methane gas was released because of this kind of industrial catastrophe, and people's houses could explode at any moment. So we get to see the people that Hochschild's writing about this book and hear them talk about why they don't want to leave, how sad they are, how much they love this place. And that should help you after watching that. And then there's also, chapter, I think it's chapter 7, I forgot, maybe I take them in reverse order. There's this huge petrochemical complex being built around Lake Charles by Sasol, I think a South Africa based just mega company. And it's part of an $84 billion economic chemical complex that's being built there. Largest foreign direct investment in U.S. history. And this is a video from late 2019. The Sasol keeps posting new videos about how they're progressing with this monstrosity of this just this industrial complex. So there's probably some even more new videos, but this was a kind of summing up video towards the end of last year, and I'd like you to take a look at it just to talk about the scale of what's happening to this town, and what this petrochemical facility actually looks like. And I'll talk more about that, about Sasol and what they've done, as the lecture progresses. Discussion board for today. 3 tasks. I think last week on Thursday when I was talking to Toby one-on-one in the video chat, I mentioned that I thought there was a really good level of discourse in the class, really trying to figure out who these people are, how they think, even though some of us might radically disagree with us, and some of us might feel like we've been attacked by them, criticized by them, disrespected by them, and these are folks who maybe want us or our family not even as part of this country anymore. And I've always mentioned, I don't want you to push yourself too far in empathizing with people who you feel like are trying to do trauma to you. So, you don't have to engage that much. If that's your stance, that's a very understandable stance. This is very emotional material. But if you want to solve these problems, and if you want to engage your enemies, if they are your enemies, they could also be your allies depending on your politics. It always helps to know who they are and what they actually believe. So I want you to do some work now and just list a short, 9 words on your discussion post for today. And I was mentioning this conversation with Toby, and this is something I used to do in class, and I wanted people to be truly honest. So I did an exercise, a pedagogical exercise. It's called the snowball practice. And people don't put their names on a sheet of paper, and they write down words that describe the people that Hochschild's writing about, or how they feel towards them. Then they crumple up the papers, throw them around the classroom, throw them around the classroom again and again and again. And then you just pick up a crumpled paper close to you and you read it. And it's not you who wrote it, it's somebody else. So you can be really honest. And the first time I ever did this a few years ago, somebody wrote something just like vicious, like, I hate all Christians. I wish they would all die. They're evil. That was like the first comment. And it was just like, whoa, where did that come from? I'd ask people to be tolerant and nice, knowing there were a lot of Christian people in the room. But, some people took the honesty a bit too far. So for today, think of 3 positive words to describe the people, conservatives in South Louisiana, Tea Party allies, that Hochschild's writing about. What's good about them? Give me 3 words that describe their good qualities. Then give me 3 words that, from your perspective, or even if you like these people, from the perspective of somebody who might not like them, of what's negative about them. I would give you ideas here, but I want you to really do this on your own, and I'm not even going to give you any examples. And then something I haven't asked before, but 3 more words that describe the lives of these people, the situation which they live in, hence not them per se, but what they're dealing with. Tell me what you think, 3 words that describe that life, that situation, that describe it well. So go for it. Haven't checked yet. There's probably already some words up there, but hopefully I'll talk about them on Tuesday when I do the next video lecture. So these chapters cover this, a bunch of environmental catastrophes. There's been many in Louisiana. Amazingly, right before I logged on to do this video lecture, I got a notification on my cell phone from the New York Times that Donald Trump, the administration, has just eased restrictions so that companies can send, let's see, what did it say exactly? Come on, notifications. Now they're not coming down. Basically, can send more methane, and I think into the air, or mercury into the ground. So, there used to be at least somewhat stricter laws, and the administration is saying now, because of the the economic situation, companies feel free to send toxic chemicals into the ground. We aren't going to stop you. We're not going to watch. And, I was watching a video about COVID-19 last night. Actually, I had an interview with Al Gore, and it's been shown via studies that living in polluted areas is a comorbid factor for getting really sick or dying from COVID-19, because of all of the health problems that are associated with living next to hazardous industries. We know the rates of asthma in communities, marginalized communities, communities of color, are much higher, partially because hazardous facilities are situated intentionally next to communities that are poor, that have a hard time mobilizing politically, that don't have powerful political networks. So you get these respiratory illnesses, you get health problems. So to restrict or to reduce restrictions on environmental contamination at a time when we're suffering from this new health problem, boy, that's a strange one. I get it. You want businesses to do well. You don't want regulations. It's been a large something we see in this chapter in this book over and over again. Conservatives don't like regulations at all. But when people are dying, you would think you'd want to protect them even more from environmental factors that could make them sicker rather than expose them to more environmental contaminants. So, anyways, once again, this book, even though it was written, before Trump was elected, it's just right when he was getting popular. It's when her research ended, and when we knew probably he was going to be the Republican candidate. This book is really, really relevant to what's going on right now. I also saw in the news, in Michigan, I think the governor finally ordered some, kind of quarantine, stay in place restrictions, and there was a massive protest at the Capitol, in which you had a lot of right-wing Tea Party aligned folks out, just saying you're not going to declare martial law. We have constitutional rights to assemble, and some of them were in cars, and some of them were just standing in a big group with American flags or "Don't Tread on Me" flags and automatic rifles, just saying, government, back the hell off. We don't believe what you're telling us, and you're not doing a job, and we have the right to control our own lives and expose ourselves if we want to. It's not the role of government. So this book helps you to understand that perspective. So this 1994 leak, close to the place, the Sasol plant that is growing radically now, there was the largest chemical leak in U.S. history. We discovered it in 1994. It was a chemical called ethylene dichloride, extremely toxic. And over time, 18 to 46 million pounds of this chemical escaped from an old pipeline from Conoco, mainly known as an oil company, and saturated the earth and the water in this region. Tried to do a cleanup. They only captured 1.6 million pounds of what might have been 46 million pounds. So that shows you how hard a cleanup is. Better to prevent one than to try to mitigate it after the fact. In a subsequent chapter, we'll realize that this ethylene dichloride is migrating towards the Mississippi River and really threatening the structural integrity of, I think, the I-10 bridge near Baton Rouge, which is good chance it's going to collapse with people on it sometime soon. And it's a chapter in which Hochschild talks about the value of risk and how people prize risk and taking chances. So this is a huge problem. And of course, the cleanup workers, once again, we can relate to this now. They didn't have adequate gear, personal protection equipment. Many people who tried to clean up this spill became extremely ill, developed serious respiratory problems, heart problems, and many of them became infertile by working to clean up this spill. Once again, better to prevent than to deal with it after the fact. People in this area did try to mobilize and form an activist group to try to get better mitigation and compensation and all of that stuff. But the company covertly basically sent a mole, a spy, into this group. That spy created problems, disrupted the group, and disbanded it. It's not just the FBI that tries to, historically stifle some, what it would consider to be kind of insurgent movements in this country, whether they're right wing or the left wing. And I must say, federal government, domestically has identified right wing fringe groups, terrorist groups, as the main domestic threat. Used to be animal rights activists and eco activists, which I never got, because these are people who committed to never harming a living thing, including a human being, but they were committed to destroying a lot of property, which I guess you could consider to be terrorism, depending on your perspective. So anyways, the company stopped people from mobilizing to deal with this leak. Sasol, that company, eventually took over the plant that caused the leak and operated it after the fact. So the sinkhole, watch that 7-minute video. It's awesome, about the Bayou Corn sinkhole. This is a really complicated one. I've had students in class who are geologists, and I tried to explain it, and they're like, no, you don't really know what a salt dome is, Professor Zipek. The geology is complicated. So I'll try to break it down to you, and Hochschild does a good job, although there's a lot of uncertainty about exactly what happened. So this company, Texas Brine, involved in producing all sorts of chemicals, including ones that might be useful in fracking. You need to pump a lot of salt and also all sorts of chemically enhanced liquids into the earth to get natural gas and oil out of these fractured lines, through hydraulic fracturing. And Texas brine, this was the beginning of the fracking boom, was trying to get a lot of these chemicals out of the ground. They were stored in a naturally occurring cavern, a salt dome. And I've heard this in the news too, recently, because the price of oil is so low right now. There's an overproduction. People aren't using oil because of the economic downturn. Where's all that oil going? It's not all going into big, tanks that have been created. It's getting pumped underground into geological formations like these salt domes in Louisiana for storage, because they're huge. This is a good place to store chemicals. So Texas brine disregarded regulations, and when it was, involved in trying to get this material out of the ground, I forget whether it had produced it or it was there already, it pierced the cavern wall, and on the other side of that cavern wall, there were other caverns, and that were storing dangerous chemicals and petroleum hydrocarbons, and you just had this massive sink. So Bayou Corn, this kind of lake, this swamp, all of the trees and the water just sunk into the ground. It's like a big sinkhole. Everything just spills in. And then not only does in this video, you see like the trees. I mean, just like the earth opens up and stuff falls into it. And then what comes out? Hydrocarbons and toxic chemicals. So it created a massive environmental problem with all sorts of health implications. Watch the video. It shows you well. The governor of Louisiana at the time, Governor Jindal, called for Bayou Corn, this town, to be evacuated. So because of this industrial calamity, residents had to abandon their homes. Texas brine, at that point, was accepting some culpability, and it bought some of the homes of people who had to leave. But other residents decided to sue Texas brine for more money because they didn't think they were being paid an adequate amount, and they didn't want to have to leave their homes at all. I mean, just imagine if somebody, there's what's your house is worth economically, but then the fact that you have all these emotional ties to it. And this is a place a lot of people were tied to through generations, where they were planning on retiring there. Somebody tried to buy away my place out in the hill country. I'm back in San Antonio now, as you can tell by the piles of clothes. I will donate those to Goodwill very soon. I don't know what kind of money it would take. It didn't cost that much money to buy that land, but I formed such an emotional attachment to it that, for $1 million, I wouldn't want to give it away. I'd be really pissed if I was forced to give it away. And a lot of these people felt the same way. So who was really to blame for this situation? What happened in Bayou Corn with this sinkhole? At first, Texas brine, the main company, said it's just Mother Nature. This is the way the world is. Nobody could have predicted it. How are you going to predict something like this? Then it blamed the company that it was renting space from in this underwater dome, or this underground dome, this salt dome, for not, having good information about it. It said it was their fault, the fault of the company that had actually rented this cavern space to Texas brine in the first place. And then Texas brine, of course, was insured, and the insurance company blamed Texas brine and said, you didn't follow regulations, you didn't do this in the correct way, you took out too much too quickly, and we're not going to pay you for all the money you lost and all the money you have to pay out to people. And then, of course, Texas brine blamed its own insurance company and sued them. And then another company sued Texas brine because it was planning to use a neighboring cavern to store butane gas. And because of what Texas brine had did in this collapse of the cavern system, it could no longer do it. And then Texas brine sued a different company for drilling too close to these cavern walls and weakening them. So this is a huge legal problem. Massive companies, wealthy companies, and you can imagine a few relatively poor people trying to deal with this and say, who's going to compensate us? Who do we go to? Who do we blame? It's just a mess. And with people without much money, legal aid, it's hard to negotiate these situations. And of course, most people would say, well, this is a case where the government needs to get something done. But as we've seen throughout this book, even though many people who lived in Bayou Corn did blame Texas brine, they actually blamed the government even more for what happened. There was some information that a state regulator in Louisiana knew about those weak cavern walls, but didn't do anything adequate to prevent the disaster. Of course, it's hard being a regulator when you have a governor in a state that doesn't believe in regulations or environmental protection in general. The Louisiana government was just horrible in general at overseeing the industry, the petrochemical industry, all the industries down there. Horrible at collecting taxes from it. Much more common to give subsidies and tax breaks to it. And the state government really didn't provide enough funds to adequately oversee and regulate this industry, so you could have prevented this disaster in the first place. And then local residents say, well, yeah, maybe the government has a role here, but this is our tax dollars, and anybody who works for the government basically shouldn't be doing it to make a good living. They should be doing it almost as a volunteer. So their salary should be extremely minimal. They should do it out of the goodness of their heart. Otherwise, they're basically selfish. It's an interesting position, and you get the logic of it. In some sense, they're doing charity work from these people's perspectives. But then if you don't offer any money, what quality of people are you going to get? How well trained are they going to be when they have options to do other things in the private sector or the nonprofit, non-government sector? Complicated. And we see in these chapters just some great quotes. We hear a lot about Mike Schaff, somebody we've met before, about how much these folks really hate the government. Page 114, Hochschild talking. I count all the reasons Mike Schaff disdained government. It displaced community. It took away individual freedom. It didn't protect the citizenry. Its officials didn't live like nuns, i.e. without making money. And the federal government was a more powerful, distant, and untrustworthy version of the state government. Beyond that, Mike was surrounded by a local culture of endurance and adaptation. The fish have mercury in them, cut around the dark meat, and eat the white. Something I just mentioned before, we'll talk about in a subsequent chapter about the prizing of the virtue or the value of risk and endurance. Deal with it, folks. Don't complain. Don't whine. Don't want someone to protect you. Just deal with these problems. And you can see the kind of cowboy valiance in a statement like that. But some of us would say, man, this is just not stuff people should have to be dealing with. Just like this new, removal of restriction on sending mercury into the ground. Should people have to endure that? I don't think so. Also on page 114, people in South Louisiana believe government, quote, was taking from people of good character and giving to people of bad character. We'll very quickly come to this metaphor that I mentioned before of waiting in line. People in South Louisiana, I think many of us would realize a lot of these people are really good people. They're hardworking, they're kind, they're charitable, they're open-minded in many ways. They may look a little narrow or provincial, very racist to some of us, but in many ways they have some very good qualities. And their lives are getting worse and worse. And yet the government is taking taxes from them and giving it to people that, the people in South Louisiana say, man, maybe these people aren't working as hard as us. Maybe they're not as moral as us. We don't know what they're doing. And the government, taking our money to help these other people who maybe aren't even suffering as much as us or as long as us, we do not like that. That's the perspective. So think about that. Another quote from page 114. What image of the government was at play? Was it a nosy big brother? The Coast Guard had checked for safety vests. This is this idea too that the government, why do they care? This is something we mentioned in an earlier lecture about what kind of light bulbs you use. Why do they make why do they make McDonald's put salads on the menu at the fast food restaurant? And I actually get this point. Kofan people in Ecuador, there is a progressive leftist government, and Kofan people are canoe people. Canoes were, invented by indigenous people in the Americas. All of a sudden, the leftist government in Ecuador says, we need to make sure canoes are safe. So every Kofan person living, they don't even speak Spanish, live in some remote community, might be an elder with a feather through their nose, wearing traditional clothes. Well, you need a license every year to show that you know how to safely maintain your canoe, and you need to wear a life jacket. And Kofan people were like, talk about nosy big brothers, and then we got to pay for this shit? Government, stay out of our lives, man. These are our lives. So I actually get that one, right? Nosy big brother. Government can often seem like that. Was it a remote controlling big brother, i.e. a federal instead of state Department of Education? It's not even somebody you know and knows who. It's somebody in DC getting in your life. Was government a bad parent playing favorites through such programs as affirmative action, something we talked about a second ago? Is it an insistent beggar at the door, i.e., constantly wanting to take more and more from your life in the form of taxes? It was all of these, but something else too. Just as Berkeley hippies, this is where Hochschild is from, of the 1960s felt proud to be above consumerism, to demonstrate their higher ideals of love and world harmony, even though they often depended on the parental money they were above, right? These are Trustafarians she's talking about. So too Mike Schaff and other Tea Party advocates seem to be saying, I'm above the government and all its services to show the world their higher ideals, even though they used a host of them. Remember, Louisiana takes a ton of money from the federal government, takes more than it pays out. For everything else it is, the government also functions as a curious status marking machine. The less you depend on it, the higher your status. As the sociologist Thorsten Veblen long ago observed, our distance from necessity tends to confer honor. I'm pretty sure Thorsten Veblen, University of Chicago sociologist, wrote a long time ago, 100 years ago. Pretty sure he coined the term conspicuous consumption. Famous guy. And it's this idea that our Hochschild is articulating here to describe the values of these people, that the less you depend on the handouts of someone else, especially handouts that were extracted by other people from force, taxes, the more moral you are, the more you should hold yourself in high esteem. You don't depend upon those kinds of coercive services and taxes. You produce your own life. You protect your own life. You create your own life. And that makes you feel like a better person. Does that make sense to you? Does it not make sense to you? I'm curious. I'm, ambivalent, agnostic on that question. It's not a bad way to feel. I'm just curious if you agree with it. So some more information on this giant mega development project in this town of Westlake. Now, this is Sasol, the company I mentioned before. It's a South African company, and it itself was building a $21 billion, over 3,000 acre petrochemical plant in this Louisiana town of Westlake. That is the largest foreign direct investment manufacturing project in U.S. history. This is another country investing in the U.S. This isn't U.S. and going and building plants in Mexico or Vietnam or something like that, or Haiti. It's another country in building plants in Louisiana in the United States. And that Sasol $21 billion project is going to be part of this larger $84 billion investment in petrochemical plants in the area, leading the Wall Street Journal, a pro-business, relatively conservative newspaper, to call this area in South Louisiana Qatar on the Bayou, basically a Middle Eastern petrochemical giant in the swamps. So as part of this giant mega development project, the government is, demanding, in line with what the corporations say they need, to close 26 public roads, to buy 883 public lots, to buy local churches, to demolish them, to make new roads that can carry, very high weight trucks, or in some cases, closing churches by force through something called eminent domain, and also forcing people to leave their homes through eminent domain. This is one of those interesting contradictions I see in some conservative thought. Massive prizing of the rights of private property. We see that here in Texas quite a bit. Yet, corporations also claim to have the right to take your private property away to build things, especially large hydrocarbon, oil facilities like pipelines or refineries or whatnot. I just, close to my place in the Hill Country, a company wanted to build a pipeline through it. And you had all these very conservative ranchers who are very pro-oil, pro-America. And they're just like, you're not taking my grandpa's land. I'm going to sit there with a shotgun, and you company and police or whoever you send in, I'm going to stop you. There was a lawyer there who's just like, trying to get this pipeline stopped. And he said, I know y'all want to do that. Don't do that. It's not going to work, and it's going to end really badly. Amazingly, this small town, I live right on the edge of it, called Utopia in the Texas Hill Country. I believe it's the only town in Texas that successfully stopped two pipelines from being built through it. And I was part in a small way of mobilizing against this route for the pipeline, and it was stopped, which was great to see. I actually want to write an ethnography of it, right? When you have these very conservative ranchers, and then you have folks like me and retirees who are liberal and they're interested in plants and bird watching, and that people raising cattle, and they come together and they fight these projects of the government and companies trying to take away your family's land. And it's a weird thing for conservatives, right? You believe in private property, but you also believe in industry and oil and patriotism. How do people negotiate those situations? It'd be an awesome master's thesis. I'd love a student to work on that, or maybe I'll write a book on it. After I write about my book about, I think I mentioned to you, I'm going to write a book about, liberal people who hunt in Texas, and why people who don't seem like quote unquote gun nuts are really interested in hunting. And I'm going to call that book "Hunting Liberals in Texas." Going to sell a lot. It'll be an ethnography. So the people in this town, Westlake, they look at these sacrifices they'll have to make, but they think they're going to get high-paying jobs. And we've talked before about many of these high-paying jobs aren't going to go to locals. Some locals will get it. Like the mayor of this town was paid $180,000 a year as a foreman in one of these facilities. But a lot of the labor will come from out of state. The construction labor will be temporary, and it won't be locals. A lot of people, Hochschild mentioned, Filipino people, Mexican people will come in and do this work and then leave. But these people are also, so they're sacrificing places they love and the environment and potential health risks from contamination, not just for high paying jobs, but also for this sense of patriotism. They're very happy about the fracking boom and increasing U.S. oil production because they want to make the United States energy independent. Of course, what we know now is the U.S. is not only energy independent, we are selling hydrocarbons to other countries. We are exporters now. We are the largest oil producer in the world. We are producing more oil than Saudi Arabia. We're not a member of OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. So we don't take quotas. I just read another article from about President Trump, a policy proposal now. The idea is to pay oil producers to leave the oil in the U.S. in the ground. Is that what money should be going to right now? I know my politics come out, but I'm just, I love people to be contrarians and share their own politics. And I'm just, saying what I see. On the other hand, oil is essential to our economy. So I understand you got to protect these producers. But along with that, should come a lot of regulation so that, people don't suffer health problems and the land's not destroyed. That's my own perspective. It doesn't have to be yours. And of course, Sasol, because it has to attract all these highly skilled, highly educated workers to run this really complicated plant, has to attract them from other states. They don't find a lot of them in South Louisiana. What do these people want to live in? What kind of town? They want really good public schools. They want beautiful public parks. But Westlake, this town in South Louisiana, doesn't collect a lot of taxes, and it's broke. And Sasol says, we're not going to build that shit. You have to build it so that we can invest this money and get the workers we want to and make money here. It's your job to actually build the public infrastructure that these highly educated workers will want. That's the situation. Sasol and the environment. I think this is the last slide. This new plant, this $21 billion petrochemical plant, watch the video. It shows you its scale. Estimates are that it will emit 85 times the state's legal threshold of benzene into the environment each year. Benzene is another highly toxic chemical, a carcinogen, 85 times the legal limit as currently set. It's also, Sasol through this plant has permission to use 13 million gallons of relatively clean water from the Sabine River every day. It would use this water, partially contaminate it, and then dump it right back into the Calcasieu River. So it'll have the right to do that as part of the agreement. The state of Louisiana also gave Sasol permission to emit 10 million tons of new greenhouse gases each year, with no plans for how to try to capture any of that carbon. Once again, if you're a conservative, you might not believe in global warming. We've heard here some of these people do believe in global warming, like the Aranos. They interpret it as kind of an end times Revelations, Book of Revelation style heating of the earth. Then there's that also question of, if it's such a slow environmental problem, maybe the rapture will occur before we have to suffer from global warming. So should we even worry thinking about it now when we need to make money right now? These are the complex logics at work. In discussing, all of this development around Westlake, Hochschild says in all the meetings she went to and interviews, basically no one talked about pollution as something they should be worried about. The mayor of the town of Westlake, Bob Hardy, argued that pollution from industry, this is something companies used to do. The technology's too good now. We're not going to have any pollution. Of course, this is right after the BP, Horizon giant oil spill in the Gulf. So not totally true. And that the mayor said there's already tons of government regulations that'll keep us safe and we'll make sure there's no spills or anything like that. Nothing to worry about. And then Bob Hardy, the mayor, also relied on some personal anecdotes. And this is complicated. This is the same thing you saw in my book about, cancer in Doreno. He's worked in petrochemical plants. His brothers worked in petrochemical plants. None of them have had cancer. Yet the same people who worked alongside them did get cancer at very high rates. So the mayor says, my God, it's not the contamination, it's just genetics. It's just personal differences. Same thing in Doreno with the Kofan, i.e., this person, they all died of new forms of cancer. But here's an elder who's 85 years old, and there's another one who's 85 years old. So if this is environmental contamination is hard because it doesn't kill everybody in the same way. You're exposed in different ways. You're genetically a little bit different from everybody else. It's really hard to say this is how many people and who exactly will have health problems or die because of it. And you have the mayor broadcasting this personal experience to people. I worked in these facilities for years. He says, I'm fine, my family's fine, so don't worry about anything. What do you think about that? So anyways, we'll see if this actually recorded. Looks like it's still recording. And we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.